Hello, welcome back. Now, I will be discussing the life science and physical science questions from the 2020 prelim papers. Have your paper with you and let's get started. The first question is question 29. Now, you will notice that there are 4 different animals there and they have given some characteristics of these animals. So when you're given pictures, you're supposed to observe them and identify the characteristics. For example, 6 legs, pair of antenna, 3 body parts. You can see that there are pair of wings, 6 legs, antenna, 3 body parts. You can see that there are 4 limbs here or 4 legs with a pair of wings. And you can see here 8 legs, right? And I can't see the body parts so clearly. So here they talk about pairs of legs and do not have 3 pairs of legs. So those are 3 pairs of legs, of course, will be A, 3 pairs of legs, and B, 3 pairs of legs. And they talk about those with wings. And this one have wings, so of course it will be B. Okay, now the other one here will be do not have 3 pairs of legs but have wings. Well, 4 legs and a pair of wings. Next one we look at will be the characteristics of living things. Now, take note that whenever you're discussing characteristics of living things, you've got to be quite clear and generalize it. Now, there are several answers. These are not the only 2 answers. You can talk about living things grow, living things reproduce, living things in air, food, and water. Take note this is considered as one answer. Don't separate these 3. And living things respond to changes in the environment. Okay, there are several answers that you can give. Let's go to the next one. Now, this is question 30. Do be careful. A few of my students actually confuse question 30 with question 29. And they use the flowchart in question 29 to answer question 30. These are 2 different questions. The evidence from one question does not flow over to the next question. Now, based on the diagram above, which group of living things can organism U be classified under? Of course, group of living things refers to those that you have learned in primary 3, like mammals, like plants, microorganisms, fish, amphibians, reptiles, and of course insects. And which group? Of course insects, and give one reason over to a reason. So actually this chart has given me more than 1, so I've marked the part. I just need 1 correct one. Okay, now don't be tempted to give too many answers because for every wrong answer you give, marks will be deducted. Now let's take a look at the next part of the question. Now this part is about the life cycle of organism U. As you can see, this is an insect with a 4-stage life cycle. Adult lay eggs. Eggs will turn into a larva that will eat a lot. And then the larva will go to a pupa stage where it starts its metamorphosis or transformation into the adult eventually. Now, Aliana recorded the effects of temperature on the life cycle of organism U in the table below. Right? Take note of the headings. Whenever you see a table, you must take note of what these headings are because they describe the numbers beneath them. All this here shows increasing temperature from 20 to 25, 30, 35 degrees Celsius. Here it says number of days in each stage. So it means that, for example, at 20 degrees Celsius, you will spend 2 days at the egg stage, then it will hatch. Then here, you will spend 8 days in the larva stage, 10 days in the larva stage before it will go into the pupa. You will then spend 8 days in the pupa stage, and finally it becomes an adult. It will spend 14 days as an adult. During that time, you can lay eggs, and then eventually you will die. Of course, so you need to look at each row separately. So based on the results, how did the temperature affect the time taken for organism U to become adult? So become adult, we look at just egg, larva, pupa. These 3 days here will do. So look at what this child has done. She added 2 plus 10 plus 8 is 20. She ignored this one correctly because the question asks how did it affect the time it takes to become an adult. So we ignore the adult part. We just look at the part it takes to reach this portion. As you can see, as the temperature increases, the time taken is actually decreases. Now, many of you are quite careless and you talk about time become less. That's fine. But if time becomes faster, be very careful. You cannot speed up time. You cannot slow down time. You can increase the amount of time you take. You can decrease the amount of time you need. But you cannot make time go faster or slower. So this bracketed part will be the answer for this question. Let's move on. Now, this is a human body system question, and when questions get a bit more complicated, it happens it means that multiple systems are combined together. So here you can see that there are three systems combined together here: digestive system, circulatory system, and the respiratory system. How do you know it's a digestive system? Because food enters this. How do you know this is a circulatory system? Because it's transporting stuff all over the body, to all parts of the body. And how do we know this is the respiratory system? Because air is taken in by the system. Of course, it has to be the respiratory system. Whenever you see a diagram like this, the legend or the key is very important. The different kinds of arrows shows you the different things that are being transported inside. This arrow shows food being transported. This one shows oxygen being transported. And this bow line followed by dash and bow line represents the movement of carbon dioxide. So the first question is a 2-mark question. Very careful, 2-mark question. Explain how systems X and Y work together to allow all parts of the body to get energy. Therefore, you must talk about how system X works and how it links to Y, but only for the purpose of getting energy. So there were students who wrote about in detail how food enters the mouth, how the teeth chews the food, swallow down the gullet, enter the stomach, go to the small intestine. All those are unnecessary. Alright, just go to the part whereby it becomes digested food. So when the food goes into the digestive system, system X, which is the digestive system, the food is digested and absorbed into the bloodstream. So this will be 1 mark. This one focus on the digested food because digested food is a thing that allows our body to get energy. So we focus on that part. Once enter the bloodstream, and blood is part of the circulatory system. So then we go on to the circulatory system, and this provides a link to the circulatory system, which is Y, which then transport this digested food to all parts of the body. And then, of course, this food is used to produce your energy or to provide you with energy. Alright, you cannot really produce, you can provide them with energy. So this is a good answer for this. Now, next one, describe question. Okay, I emphasize whenever you are describing answers, you've got to be very, very clear and step by step. How carbon dioxide is transported within the human body and released into the environment. So transported is a clue to tell you it's about the circulatory system. Released into the environment tells you it's about the respiratory system. So if you talk about part A, this one shows how the digestive system and the circulatory system works. In part B, it shows you how the circulatory system and the respiratory system works. So let's talk about carbon dioxide. It's produced by cells in the body and transported by blood to the heart first, then pumps to the lungs, right, where exchanges of gases takes place. Okay, this is the first one part. It talks about how this carbon dioxide from all parts of the body gets to the lungs. Because the lungs is the next part, right? Lungs is part of the respiratory system. Now it goes to the heart first, which is a key part of your transport system, the circulatory system. So what happened here? Well, the carbon dioxide moves through the windpipe, out of the nose, where we breathe out. So many of you forgot about the windpipe. Somehow the carbon dioxide can go from the lungs straight away to the nose. Cannot, okay? And good thing nobody mentioned about you breathe out through your mouth, because your mouth is basically not your main organ where you will take in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide. Unless you walk around with your mouth open and just breathing through your mouth. Oh, okay, don't tell me if you do that, it'll be kind of weird. Alright, let's move on to the next question. Okay, now this part here shows you the reproductive parts of the plant and the human respectively. Now, so you can see from the annotation here, this child actually annotated this part wrongly. This part should be the ovary, not the stigma. The stigma is on the top part here. Enter, yes, correct. Ovary, correct. Womb, correct. So which two parts will the fertilized egg develop and grow? So state the names of these two parts. Write your answer in the table below. So part B should be, part B is the part whereby the fertilized egg cell will develop. Right, the pollen grains land on the stigma, goes the pollen tube down into the ovary, and then the male will fuse with the female reproductive cell, which are the ovules. Right, so the name of this part here is the ovary. So this will be a 1 mark per row, so no marks for this row. Diagram B here, number 2 here. So it shows you that part D is the womb. Alright, and that's where the fertilized egg will actually develop. Let's move on to the next part of the question now. Well, look at this map and the key below, right? P and Q are two different kinds of plants. Well, P is again, we talk about diagrams and key. You got to look at all these to identify what each of these symbols represent. Black triangle, parent plant of P. White triangle, young plant of P. Black square, parent plant of Q. White square, young plant of Q. And then observe where they land. So if this is the parent plant of Q, notice the young plant are all along this river. Therefore, it's very clearly dispersed by water. Then look at this. All right, the triangle plant P and the young plant are all around it. So it's definitely dispersed by splitting. So which plant P and Q are dispersed by explosive action? Explain. So plant P are dispersed by, so first is your claim. Okay, claim is P, correct, but no marks. Now you got to explain using your evidence. What's the evidence? Well, the seeds of P are all near the young plant. That's your evidence. Now, a reason has been given to you already, is by explosive action. Now, be very careful with your wordings. You talk about this dispersed by in random manner. Well, that is usually used to describe dispersal by animals, because animals don't follow a certain routine that us humans follow in the same way. All right, so theirs will be randomized. So be very careful, don't use words that suggest a different concept. Now, how about this one, right? So right now you have three diagrams, right? X, Y, and Z. This has fibrous husks, this has hooks, this has wing-like structure. So which is the fruit of plant Q? So we recap that plant Q actually disperses by water, right? So by water, there must be some characteristics. The characteristics include things like waterproof outer covering, fibrous husk that traps air so it can float on water, and so on. But here, there's no, we need to depend on the picture for evidence. There's no labeling that says this is a waterproof outer covering, so we cannot use that. We can use fibrous husk, but we've got to mention the function of the fibrous husk, that it traps air so it can float on water. Don't just quote this given phrase here, fibrous husk. So what? How does a fibrous plant work? You're supposed to explain how it works to help this fruit to disperse by water. So for it to disperse by water, it must be able to float. How can it float? There must be something to trap air. So all this portion here has to be in, not just simply fibrous husk. So you can read through this. This is a very, very detailed answer, which you don't need to have such a detailed answer. So I bracketed the part that will be worth the 1 mark for the child. The rest of it are very useful information, but not necessary. Alright, so you need to be also careful with your time management, because you do want time to look over your answers to improve them. Alright, so be very careful. This is a 1 mark question, so it deserves the amount of words for 1 mark. But this is more for like 2 marks kind of answers. Just be wary of that. But of course, very good answer, very detailed. Now this next one now is about your plant transport system, right? Now, so here, what's the function of part C? Clearly, this is a give mark question. So just to ease you into the question. So part C, roots absorb water and mineral salts from the ground. All right, there are two functions, right? So the other one is the roots also anchor the plant firmly to the ground. Now, many of you didn't write mineral salts. That's fine for this question, because the main thing here that plants need will be water. Without water, plant will die. But without mineral salts, plant will not be healthy, but they won't die just yet. And then here they ask you, could leaves A and B continue to survive after 2 weeks? Explain for each leaf. Now let's take a look at the leaf one more time, the picture one more time. You notice that leaf A is found on this branch that's linked to the stem. Right? Everything seems fine from this portion. There's nothing that was cut. So the food made in the leaf can travel down to the roots happily, and the water from the roots, water from the soil can be absorbed up the roots all the way to the stem here through water carrying tubes to the leaves, to the flowers, no problem. But for leaf B, there's a different story here, because they remove both the water and food carrying tubes. So the water can travel up to this point, then it will just start to collect here, swell, and water cannot reach the leaf B. Now leaf B won't die immediately, but eventually it will die. After it uses up whatever water is left in the water carrying tubes that was here originally before it was cut, then it will then stop making food. Without water, which is necessary for photosynthesis to happen, it will stop making food and it will die. So let's take a look at the answer. Right? So yes, leaf A will survive. Why? Because the water carrying tubes below it are still intact for water absorbed by the roots to be transported to it. So leaf A can still make food, can still photosynthesize. This is the part that many of you missed out. Huh? Because living things, to survive, living things need air, food, and water. Air, food, and water. So don't just talk about it has water because the water carrying tubes are not cut off. Talk about the food as well. It can also make food. It can also make food. Leaf B, of course it will die because water carrying tubes were damaged. So what if they were damaged? It means water cannot be transported all the way to leaf B. So what? So leaf B cannot make food, it cannot photosynthesize, of course it will die. So the part about linking to food was missing in many of your answers. Part C, iodine turns from yellowish to blue-black in the presence of starch. After 2 weeks, what happened? This part is just simply got to memorize this, right? If leaf A can make food, then excess food will turn to starch. And starch can turn iodine, which is yellowish brown, into blue-black. Leaf B, after 2 weeks, it will probably be dead by then, right? So there will not be any excess food, so to speak. Then, of course, the yellowish brown of iodine will remain as yellowish brown. Now, question 34 talks about how you read the graph. So those who can read it well, very good. Because you notice there are 2 parts. First part here shows increasing rate of photosynthesis, right? With the increasing amount of light intensity, the rate of photosynthesis increase. But that's only true for 0 to 2000 units of light. After 2000 units of light, between 2000 and 8000, it shows a flat line here, which means the rate of photosynthesis remains unchanged. It means constant. That is the part missing in many of the answers. So take a look at how this child answered it. The rate of photosynthesis increases when the light intensity increases to 2000. That explains this part, correct? And remains constant as the light intensity increases from 2000. From here onwards, it remains constant. Very good. Now here, describe the process of photosynthesis in plants, where I talk about it's basically the formula, but you cannot just use the formula for your answer. Right here, you got to describe it. The formula, some of you wrote down the whole formula itself, CO2 plus H2O, in the presence of light and chlorophyll gives you food and oxygen. That formula guides you to answer this, but that formula doesn't replace the requirement of the question, which is describe this process. So please make sure you also write it down in prose, in words. Okay, this is what I mean, right? Don't just write down the formula. It doesn't replace the description, kind of the describe kind of question. Now let's take a look at this diagram, right? So of course, with light, the plant can photosynthesize and provide oxygen for the fish. Now, without removing the airtight cover, so this is a very important condition. And conditional questions are important because when you fail to look at it, then there's a problem. So state one thing that can be done. First requirement of question, state it. Second one, explain it. So this child gave a good answer. Holes can be poked in the cover. 1 mark for the stating part, but the explanation part is not correct. Now, of course, a few of you mentioned about carbon dioxide entering, increasing with photosynthesis. That is technically true, but you will reflect back on the composition of air. How much of air is made up of oxygen? 21%. How much of air is made up of carbon dioxide? 0.03%. So how much more oxygen can your plant give you with a little bit of carbon dioxide that can enter through the hole? Versus how much more oxygen it can get directly from the air, right? So here the better answer definitely talks about not carbon dioxide can enter and go through this, increase the rate of photosynthesis. The fish will be dead by then if it requires this 0.03% of carbon dioxide to come in. Focus more on getting oxygen directly. So oxygen will dissolve, all right, on the surface. The fish will go up to the surface and take in the dissolved oxygen. So this is one of the straightforward answers. Lamp placed nearer to the fish tank because when it's nearer, light intensity increases, rate of photosynthesis increases, so therefore it produces more oxygen. Now, adding more water plant is a very common answer, but it cannot work. You get 0 straight away because I will challenge you to add water plants without removing the airtight cover. Of course, without breaking the fish bowl also. How are you going to, without removing airtight cover, add in more water plants? You cannot. Alright, so this answer cannot work. So when you check through your answers, please don't just check the science part, check also the requirement of the question. Does your answer fit the condition? Now let's take a look at this question. Now for this question to work right now, notice he's holding on to the stick, but the stick does not move. he is just this, imagine this to be a toilet roll. It's just resting on the metal plate. What moves this toilet roll, right, is when the string goes down, and this string will pull this toilet roll and rotate it. And this aluminum blade is fixed to the toilet roll. It says, right, it's attached to it, it's fixed to it. So when the toilet roll spins, the blades will spin. So this is the energy conversion. So GPE in a block converts to KE in the falling block, plus KE in a straw, plus the KE in the blades as they move. Of course, if you identify the answer wrongly, then of course there's no partial mark for this kind of question. So you only full marks or 0. Then part B, again another conditional statement. Without changing or replacing any parts in the setup, suggest one way mark can make the blades turn faster. Decrease number of coils of the thread doesn't work. You want to make it faster. True is faster means more KE. How to give it more KE? Right? Or faster means you think about making think about forces also, effects of forces. How can you make a moving object move faster? So you can either answer by forces or by energy. So this shall try to increase the amount of GPE by increasing the mass of the object. But the problem is you cannot change, you cannot replace any of the parts used. So this answer cannot work. This answer can work because when it's higher, there's more GPE to convert to more KE, therefore it can work. Or a straightforward one is just pull this string, right? If you pull this string harder, this will spin more and therefore more KE. Now to my students, right, we actually discussed this in class, so I'm surprised some of your answers are still wrong. So he repeated the experiment with the blocks of different masses. So blades of different materials are shown here. So what's the relationship between the mass of the block and the number of turns in 10 seconds? Now, what's wrong here is not the relationship, but the use of the word heavier. I explained many times to you, mass is not weight. Mass is not weight. Mass is the amount of substance in an object, whereby weight, you talk about the amount of gravitational force acting on an object. So the word heavier is used to describe weight. The word lighter is used to describe weight. Oh, I'm heavier than you, so that's my weight. I have more mass than you. It's not talking about weight, it's about amount of matter in me. So once you use the wrong word to describe this concept, I'll take it as you don't understand the idea of mass versus weight. So it's more straightforward to talk about the more the mass of the block, the more the number of turns made in 10 seconds, or the greater the mass of the block, the greater number of turns made by the blade in 10 seconds. Now part B, a lot of you got half a mark. Why? Because you talk about why you choose D and E. Right, D and E because there's only one change variable, which is the number of blades. However, you got to reject B and E as well in your answer. You got to reject it. So take a look at this answer, D and E. Why? Because to have a fair test, the only number of blades should be changed. So, but in B and E, what's wrong with B and E? Talk about what's wrong with it. The material of the blades will also change. So there were two change variables here. That's why this answer is much better. You get a full marks for it. This one is a give you free mark question. So study the question carefully, please. Alright, these are the answers for this. I will not go through this in detail. Only a few of you got this wrong. Right? Let's go back to the lesson I went through with you about Mr. Long and Mr. Ashik doing arm wrestling example. Think along that line. If this is Mr. Long, this is Mr. Ashik, depending on the amount of force that we use, that will affect how the ball will move, either to the left or towards the right. Here's another question about weight being a force, right? So here, when Tricia is on the sofa, right, the combined weight of Tricia and the sofa is greater, all right, than the force that this George could exert on the sofa. So cannot move it. So there are a few ways to answer this. You can talk about the pushing force was not greater, right, than the frictional force between the sofa and the ground. So a few of you didn't mention about frictional force. Well, frictional force has to talk about the two surfaces in contact between the sofa and the floor. Now, if you look at the other answer, right, don't mix up forces and energy. Never mix them up, all right? It gets you in a lot of trouble. Now, this part is a wording issue. A lot of you talk about the weight of the sofa will increase when Tricia sits on the sofa. That's not true. The weight of the sofa remains unchanged. I can have 10 Mr. Long sit on the sofa. The weight of the sofa did not change, but the combined total weight of sofa plus the 10 Mr. Longs, of course, increased. But the weight of the sofa itself did not change. Alright, just because if I carry my school bag and my briefcase doesn't mean that my weight increased. My weight remains the same, just that the combined weight of me plus my things I carry have increased. So this is what I talk about. Whereby I talk about frictional force, you have to mention the two surfaces that are in contact. Otherwise, I cannot assume for you what you mean by frictional force and where does this frictional force what is it exerting upon? So this is a good answer. When Tricia was on the sofa, the weight of the sofa increases, so causing more frictional force to be there between the sofa and the floor. So yeah, that's already 1 mark. But she went on to explain further, which is good, so I use hers to explain to you. So needing more pushing force to overcome the frictional force. Alright, to push the sofa all together. Okay, sorry, up to this point. So very good. Now what are 2 reasons why when Tricia got off the sofa, Josh and pushed the sofa together with Josh, and Josh found it much easier. Because right now both of them exert the amount of force needed to push the sofa. So each of them uses less force. So therefore, of course, it's easier for Josh because he can now use less force. Plus, there's no additional weight with Tricia on the sofa. So of course, the frictional force is less here as well. So this is a very good answer for this. So this next part talk about he removed the spring. P is from part A and spring Q is from part B. Let's examine the graph. The graph shows that when mass is placed on the ends of the spring and they were both at the 0 extension. Now this extension, this is not length of the spring, okay? The spring cannot be 0 cm. So you can see that Q extends up to this point when you put a 5 gram mass on it, but P extends twice of it. So you can tell that P is less stiff and Q is more stiff, or P is more flexible, Q is less flexible. So if Tricia wants to sit on the sofa and she don't want to sink in so much, right? Which one should we sit on? Of course, sit on the part whereby the spring is stiffer. And that's part B, right? Part B. And this child was very careful. She noticed she made a mistake. She wrote part Q, but Q is a spring. Q is not the part of the sofa. So part B, why? Because spring Q, which is from part B, extend lesser, give the evidence from the graph first. So there's less elastic spring force acting there, right? So give the reason, and this will be the 1 mark. So what are some common mistakes? This is the most common kind, where I talk about which part A and B. The question will say A and B, then my students went on to write down Q. Alamak, right? So please make sure you listen to the question, you read the question carefully. Take note that elastic is not flexible. You go and Google for it. The meaning is very different. So do not confuse the meaning of these 2 words and use them interchangeably. Right? So if you use the word elastic, I have to mark you as wrong for the reason part. Use the word simpler word as stiffer, less stiff, or flexible, more flexible, less flexible. This is another good answer. What's the claim? Right, C, part B. What's the evidence? Q, spring Q at B extended less than spring P at A. That's the evidence. What's the reason? Well, because spring Q is stiffer. So we're not compressed as much to cause the person sitting down to sink down too much in comparison to P. Very good answer. Now let's examine this picture here, right? There's no magnet here. Now so many of my students wrote down, oh, what are the forces acting on P? Magnetic force. That's because there's a magnet here doesn't mean there's a magnetic force acting on it. P has magnetic field around it, but if there's no magnet opposing it or attracting it, then it will not be experiencing a magnetic force. Get it? Alright? Of course, it will experience a gravitational force. The gravitational force pulls it down. So what keeps it here? Clue. Yes, elastic spring force keeps it there. Alright, elastic spring force keeps it there. Now, let's take a look at other things. So, magnetic force definitely is not correct. And, yeah. So, the other thing is this. Some of you gave just one answer, right? Gravity. But the clue here is forces, That's a clue, plural. So, that tells you there is more than one. So, go find it. If you only have one answer, it means out one of them. Part B and C are very similar, but they are different at the same time. So state the change in the length of the spring. Of course, the spring decreased. Why? Because there was repulsion between Q and P. That's all I'm looking for here. I talk about there's compression because there's repulsion. And part C talk about increase in length or there's extension in the spring. Why did it happen? The explanation is P and Q were attracted to each other. And that's all to this answer. For this one, you want the ring to fly further. How? You're going to compress this spring more. So you're going to make sure your answer tells us clearly this wooden spring will be pressed all the way to the left until it touches the support, or as far as you can. So like pushing the wooden ring further back against the spring. That is correct. That is the first way. I suggest one way to make the wooden ring fly further. So how can you answer this? 2 ways of answering. You answer by there's more elastic potential energy stored in the spring. They will convert the more Ke in the wooden ring, like how this child has written it. More potential energy in the compressed spring, convert to more Ke in the flying wooden ring. Of course, then you can fly further. This is the other way using forces. Alright, so the spring has more elastic spring force that can push against the wooden ring more with more force. to make it fly further. Of course, the third answer, which is less common, is about using a lubricant to reduce frictional force. That is also correct. Alright, because using a lubricant doesn't modify the setup. These options still keep to the condition here, which is without changing the setup. If you're going to use the formula or the energy conversion statement, very careful, right? The potential energy in the spring doesn't convert to the kinetic energy in the ring directly. It converts to kinetic energy in the spring first. It is a moving spring that pushes the wooden ring. So if you get this part wrong, of course, you will not get marks for the explanation portion. You will still get marks for the evidence, or for your suggestion to make the wooden ring fly further. And whenever you talk about energy conversion, the source of the energy is necessary. It's always important, the source of energy, to be very clear. So if you don't just talk about more elastic potential energy, where is it? In the compressed spring. Convert to more kinetic energy, where is it? In the ring. Alright, don't talk about the gravitational potential energy. You're moving this further, not moving it up. You'll go up, but you still come down. Alright? Now, this is a very straightforward question, a P5 kind of question. So I'm just going to show the answer for this. If you see condensation here, it tells you there must be some warm water vapor condensing, lost heat, and condense here. Here, of course, the water vapor outside the cup in the surrounding touches on the cooler surface of the glass, loses heat and condense. So most of the problem is that you didn't talk about the losing of heat. So let's take a look at some of the common errors. Okay, do I have it? Okay, I don't have it here. So first common error is that you forget to write down lose heat. Now, second common error I saw was this: air condense. Air cannot condense. Air has many gases here, right? Oxygen cannot condense the water droplets, right? Carbon dioxide doesn't condense in the water droplets, right? So when you say air condenses, straight away is wrong. Okay, so this is a good answer that I can pause here to take a look at it further if you want to. Now let's take a look at this one. Is also a good answer, right? Explains very, very well. You can pause it here. Now, next one here. This is also a very standard question. How does mirror become fog? Same thing. The water vapor in his breath touches the cooler surface of the mirror, condenses, loses heat, and condenses into the water droplets. Now, this answer, the most common one will be the second room was warmer than the first one, or the mirror in the second room was higher temperature. Basically, alright, the temperature difference between his breath and the mirror now is less. Smaller temperature difference means this is not, the cooler surface is not so cool anymore. If it's not so cool anymore, means the rate of condensation will actually decrease. Okay, last two questions. Now circuit question, right? So take a look. So when attach these two here, this one lights up. Lights up means the battery definitely is working. So don't say the battery has run out of power or anything. They swap these two positions. Now the original bulb light up L, right? Don't light up anymore. Why? Okay, or these two, they swap it. So that means that something is wrong with Q, right? So what is Q? Q is an insulator of electricity, or you can say it's not a conductor, it's fine. And the other thing is then, no matter, even you move the conductor, P must be conductor of electricity, right? You move it here, it still didn't light up. Means there's something wrong with the bulb. And the question here, notice, they didn't say that there's nothing wrong with the bulb. They didn't say all the components are working fine. So these are the two answers to these two reasons. So what is the material that can be used to make the wire? Notice it's to make the wire, not to make the coating. So of course, use any metal will do, steel, metal, copper, whatever, right? Why? It is a conductor of electricity. So some of you misread the question and thought it's supposed to be plastic. Not talking about the prevent for electrocution, not the kind of question, no? It's just say make the wire, not to make the covering. Next one here, take a note here. This is plus, minus, plus, minus. Many of you put down minus, plus, minus, plus. So be very careful. How do you know this side is plus, minus? Because see, wire loop here, wire loop here. So orientation is important. And this is in series. So it's also in series. Now, okay, so this answer will be wrong because it shows minus, plus, minus, plus. It's plus, minus, plus, minus. Now, last question. I'm just going to pause it here. Take a look here. Basically, right, how does it go up? How does it slow down here? It's moving up from P to Q. So there's KE here. But as it goes further up, it's stretching this elastic rope. So what are the two things for slowing down? The elastic spring force in the elastic rope, alright, as well as the gravitational force. But the problem with question A is this, no? A asks you to explain in terms of energy conversion. So you cannot use forces to explain. So take a look at this answer, right? More kinetic energy here is converted to more elastic potential energy when the spring was stretched from P to Q. You can say that. You can also say more KE is converted to more GPE as well. So that slows him down. Now, next one. So once he reaches Q, he starts to fall. What are two things that pull him down? Gravity pulls him down. Again, the forces, right? And then elastic spring force from the stretch rubber ring pulls him down. The last one here, this one answer they can use for this question, right? June was lighter than Timothy, has less weight. Less weight will mean that she will not stretch this elastic rope so much. If it doesn't stretch it so much, then of course there's less elastic spring force in the elastic rope that will spring up, they will push him upwards. Alright, you can pause it here to take a look at these answers here as well. Now, this is another answer. Talk about June heavier. It's also possible. If June is heavier, what happens? So there's greater gravitational force acting on her. So of course, when she goes up, right, she cannot go as high. The elastic potential energy in the elastic potential energy in this stored in the rope is unable to move her up as fast, to move her as far. But here I pause for a moment because I'm talking about forces and energy together. I think it can work here, but I'm usually very careful when students put in forces and energy together. All right. So here talk about forces. Where is the force from? Force is in the stretch rope. Have to mention either compressed spring, stretch spring. All these words are important. Okay, this is another good answer. Okay, with this, I end this sharing with you. All the best to your science prelims.